Tonight's shiur is called Can Humanity Have Sustainable Morals? In other words, can a human being who would follow his own intellect and the guidance of his own heart, can we have sustainable morals, that the morals would be sustained throughout generations or not? Or are we destined to forever be weak and feeble and not be able to withstand either the temptation or the differing things that suit us that we would like to implement? And it's based upon two things in this week's parasha. Abraham Avinu travels to the city of Gerar, where the king there is Avimelech. And he tells his wife, tell them you're my sister. Tell them you're my sister in order that no harm will come me, etc. And indeed, of course, Sarah, we know, is very beautiful. And when they see her and how beautiful she is, and they ask, who is she? She says, my sister. And they see her fitting for none other than the king himself. So the king hears about it, and he takes her as a wife. And when he takes her as a wife, Hashem sends him a message that this is, she's a married woman, she's Abraham Avinu's wife, he's a prophet, she's a prophet, so keep away. He comes to Abraham and he complains and he says, "What? How could you do such a thing? How could you bring such a disaster, such a great sin upon me and upon my nation? How could you say such a thing? How could you put me in a situation by which I would sin and err?" There's an interesting verse that says as follows. Vayomer Abraham. Abraham responds to him. Now, Avimelech and his people are not uncouth people like the Egyptians. He really, when Abraham went to Egypt, he really had what to suspect. They were really uncouth, immoral people. The people of Gerar, the people of Avimelech, were much more moral people, people of standing, people of laws, people of rules, of structure. Just wasn't a city where you just did what you want. As we see from the very conversation that Avimelech had with Abraham Avinu, was very sincere. How could you bring such a big sin upon me? He was very sincere. So what does Abraham Avinu tell him? A very interesting thing. He says, Vayomer Abraham, Ki amarti rak en yirat Elohim b'makom hazeh, vayarguni al davar ishti. I saw that there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me concerning my wife. The Hatam Sofer, one of the great commentaries, speaks about this word, rak. Rak means but only. But only, there is no fear of God in this place. And he says, what type of language is this? But there is only, in other words, it's only lacking one thing. Everything else is good. I agree with you. You're right. You're moral people. You're good people. The fact that it says rak, but one thing, there's lacking. You guys, true, you have rules, you have laws, you have morals, but there's one thing missing here, and that is the fear of God. And because of there is lack of fear of God, I am then concerned that the people will kill me concerning my wife. What is he telling him here? What is he telling him here? Abraham Avinu, being a man of God, is teaching a very powerful lesson. Before we get to this lesson, we have to ask a question. What gave Abraham Avinu that indication that there was lack of fear of God? They were good people. They were moralistic people. People who followed laws. What gave him that indication to come along and say, yes, you're moral people, you're good people, but I am concerned that that is only external. If you have a reason, or you have a desire, or you have something that you want, you may explain it away or justify it in your mind and even commit crimes that are unacceptable. That's what he's telling him. Avraham Avinu, being a man of God, is teaching the world two things. That one has to pursue truth, and that the only way to pursue truth is only through the fear of God. There cannot be proper foundation to the pursuit of truth without the fear of God. Meaning to say that Avraham Avinu tried to inculcate into the world that there is a God in the world. And if there is a God in the world, that we must pursue justice and truth and morality. But it is impossible, what Avraham Avinu is teaching the world is it's impossible to have sustainable morals because we human beings have an inner battle within ourselves all the time. We have a godly spark and we have a physical animalistic drives. And it is not sufficient. We do not have enough power in our intellect to overcome the animalistic drives, the bodily desires and temptations with intellect alone. And we will soon see. We'll soon see. But what gave him the indication that they didn't have the fear of God? How did he know? How did he know that he came to chastise the king, and of course the king by extension the people, that they fear punishment, they fear law and order, they fear justice, they fear getting caught, but that's all they fear. Rak, the only thing they don't fear is God. And that is the biggest thing that concerned Avraham Avinu. You can be a nation that follows laws, you can be a nation that are moralistic. You can have rules, but if only you fear is reward and punishment and the system of justice that you had in getting caught, that's a problem for me. So Avraham Avinu was telling him that this is my concern. How did he know? So the sages tell us that the first thing that they asked Avraham Avinu was about his wife. Who's this lady? Who's this beautiful lady? The first thing they asked him. Comes a stranger to town. He doesn't have a place to sleep. He doesn't have a place to eat. And the only thing that concerns you is who's this lady? That gave him an indication that they weren't truly concerned with other people. They were concerned with themselves and their own selfish desires. Comes a stranger and you cannot show any compassion. Not that they weren't compassionate people. Not that they weren't decent people. They were. But they were so overwhelmed by her beauty that that's all they can think about. That gave him an indication that there is something missing and something lacking here. And therefore he came to the conclusion that yes, you have rules, you abide by rules, but you know why? What? When you follow rules that are predicated upon just intellect and upon what society thinks is fair and is right, you can change them. And you can do things that suit you and justify them and pass new laws. And I'll give you an example of an interesting story in a moment. We know that there's a very interesting verse that says, Emet me'eretz titzmah. Emet, truth, grows from the ground. Why does the verse say the truth grows from the ground? Why truth? Truth is it says, Hotmo shel Kadosh Baruch Hu is emet. The seal of God is truth. What is truth? Truth is consistency. Truth is something that is enduring. The Gemara tells us in Masechet Berachot, emet yesh lo raglaim, sheker en lo raglaim. Truth has feet, has a base, has a foundation. Sheker has no feet, has no foundation, has no legs. Why is that? If you have a look at the very shape of the letter of the way Aleph and Mem and Taf, Emet is spelled, it's got a base, it's got 2 feet. If you were to create the letter 3-dimensional, they would stand up on their own. The Aleph has 2 feet. The Mem has a base and another foot. The Taf has 2 feet. Sheket has no feet whatsoever. It comes to a point. The Shin comes to a point. The Kuf comes to a point. The Reish comes to a point. It all has one leg. It would fall. And the truth is that what the definition of truth is, it's something that endures and endures forever and doesn't change. Therefore, morals cannot change, cannot be based upon society and the judicial system to decide, yes, this is good today, this is not good tomorrow. As we will soon see examples of this throughout history. So because truth is so powerful and that this is the seal of God, why does it say it comes from the ground? It should say it comes from heaven. It comes from the ground because people trample over the truth. Truth is sometimes inconvenient. It gets in the way because it's hard to be continuously truthful all the time. It gets in the way. It's inconvenient. You have to be truthful means you have to do it all the time, consistently. It endures. And perhaps this is the reason why it says that emet me'eretz titzmah, truth grows from the ground. Because people trample over it. People don't bother to bend down and to pick up truth. So we cast it down because it's an inconvenience for us. We cast it away. And therefore, according to Avraham Avinu, it's impossible for humanity, however good meaning we may be, however lawful people we are, and however good the judicial system may be, it's impossible for our morals to be enduring, to be absolutely truthful, because they will always be subjective. They'll be subjective upon what we desire and what we want and what society is pushing. You can be a fantastic politician, you can be a moral politician, but the pressure of the press, the pressure even of the few, if it comes from the press and if it's left wing or whatever the case may be, will pressure you into a situation by which you must agree to things that you truly do not believe in. And that's why the sages say that kol shirat heto kodemet lochokhmato, all those people who the fear of sin, the fear of God precedes their wisdom endures. Whoever has just but wisdom and his wisdom precedes the fear of God, the fear of sin, the fear of God, his wisdom cannot endure. What is wisdom? Wisdom is the ability to think things through, to come to proper conclusions. If you do not have the fear of God, it's impossible for that wisdom to endure, because it will always be subjective. And you will always explain things away and say that this is the right way, this is the wrong way. Today this was correct, tomorrow it's not correct, etc., etc. And this is what the lesson that Abraham Avinu was teaching them. That first and foremost you have to believe in God. And if you believe in God, then and only then your morals and your laws are sustainable, have value. If not, your morals have no value whatsoever. Malbim writes, one of the famed commentaries of the Bible, and he says like this: if you see a person or a nation of great philosophers, he says, don't trust them. For the fire of his passion may burn within him for a particular gain, and cannot be trusted that his intellect will have the strength to overcome, especially in matters of private things. Only the neshama, only the soul can empower us to overcome the weakness of man and the justification of the mind to have morals that are enduring and are consistent. And of course, we've learned many a time that the word emet is the first letter of the alphabet, aleph, mem is the middle, taf is the last, which shows that it doesn't matter how you cut it. The beginning, the end, the middle, emet is truth. Truth is from the beginning, the end. It's always the same. It's always consistent. Now this is very significant because if we look in history, we see that mankind has failed time and again in this regard. Look at the city of Sodom. The city of Sodom was blessed with wealth, to the extent that the prophet Ezekiel said that they had such wealth and such comfort, they became so selfish that they couldn't share it with anybody else, and if they did share it, you were punished because of it. Absurd. Things that were absurd. But that's where their mind led them, because they had no fear of God. They were so selfish. They wanted to keep their wealth to themselves that it totally tainted their mind, their ability to think. Absurd. Similarly, something that's absurd. Let's go to the story of the angels that came to rescue Lot and his children, his wife and his children. Angels came to rescue them, and being Lot, who, although was tainted by a certain degree of wickedness, still had within him a little bit of the hospitality of the house that he grew up in, of the home of Abraham Avinu. These two angels come, and he invites them to his house. People of Sodom hear about it, and it's against the law. It's against the law to practice hospitality. It's against the law. Can you imagine? It's against the law to be kind. Now, we know that there are people who are miserly, they just can't give. We know that there are such people. What can you do? You know, as Maimonides explains to us, that every person is born with a particular tendencies, and we must always try and develop healthy tendencies. So if we have an extreme, we must always go to the middle. If we are miserly, go to the middle. Don't be miserly. If you're spendthrift, don't be spendthrift. Go to the middle. Don't be a miser. Go to the middle. Everything with a balance. The only thing he speaks about not having a balance is arrogance. That the sages say, the person has to be exceedingly humble. And that, says Maimonides, is the middle path. A person has to be humble. There's no room for arrogance. People who are in positions of leaders and rabbis, etc., have to have some level of authority, which they exercise authority, but that's it, no more. An eighth of an eighth, he calls it. An eighth of an eighth. An eighth of an eighth. That's how little you got to have in regards to expressing your authority. But other than that, everything we have to do has to be in the middle. So we know that some people are generous, some people are not generous, and it's hard for them to give, and whatever the case may be. And that's their tikkun, that's what they have to overcome in life. But to pass a law that you're not allowed to give charity, and what about those who are generous by nature? They're not allowed to give charity also? It's absurd. But that's where sometimes the mind and our selfishness and our greed leads us. To protect our assets, to protect what's mine, not to give it away. And we come to laws that are ludicrous. And I'll give you another example in a minute. So the angels come in the house, and the people of Sodom hear about it. They're banging on the door. Bring the people out. Bring the people out. They want to kill them. They came into a town, they accepted hospitality, they disturbed our equilibrium, they disturbed our laws, they didn't respect our laws. No, what's his name? No hospitality here. Didn't you see the sign when you came in, warning? You know, you come in, 50 zone, 60 zone, no speeding, welcome to the city of this, welcome to Waverley and all of that stuff. Population this. There's a big sign. Go to the next town, an arrow with going to the next town. Don't come here. Hospitality is not practiced. Punishable by death. What does Lot do? Something unimaginable. He says, listen, I have two daughters who have not yet married. They're betrothed, but not yet married. They are pure. They have not known a man yet. I'll give them to you. Take them. Do what you like with them, but don't harm my guests. They came, the guests came to me, it's dishonorable to me, don't harm my guests. Which person in his right mind would forego the honor of his daughters for his own honor? Which person in his right mind? You ever heard such a thing? You ever heard of honor killing? How can Lot justify such a thing? So some say, well, in his mind, what were they going to do? They were going to murder. So to violate his daughters is less of a bad, less of an act than murdering these two people. But many commentators explain to us the fact that he offered his children, his daughters in the first place, to acts of immorality shows that that was his weak point. To him, immorality was nothing. So to taint his honor, because after all, he was a person who practiced the kindness or the hospitality when the opportunity did come his way, that's something that affects his honor. That's a big thing. You don't mess with my honor. To him, immorality was nothing. To him, obviously, he was very weak in marriage. His standards of immorality was very, very low. And because of that, he could offer up his daughters in exchange for his honor. He offered these people hospitality. We know that there are people in the Middle East who are very hospitable. You come to their home, they'll give you kubba and shifta and this and that, and hummus, tahina and lafa. They'll give you everything. As soon as you go out the door, you take something, they'll kill you in a second. The same person who just gave you hospitality in the home and laughed with you and shared with you a meal. You know, it says that when you share a meal, it brings people close together. How can they just kill so easily? So we see that Lot, on the one hand, was hospitable, but yet on the other hand, he was mafkir. He totally, how should I say, what's the word in English? Totally disregarded the dignity of his own daughters. So as I said, because he had a very warped sense of morality. And that's what happens. If you don't base your morality upon the fear of God and the will of God, you can do such an act. Because to you, morality and sexual license to do whatever you want is meaningless. So the honor of your daughters are meaningless, even though that normal society dictates that a father would even give his life to protect the honor and dignity of his daughters, would they not? Would they not? We know in times that there are times that a person would not. And Lot was one of them. Here is yet another example. How is that possible? And we see further that Lot was punished. How was he punished? Because when he was saved, so he was saved with his two daughters. Those two daughters that he was so easily going to give up, those two daughters, he was saved with them. Seeing destruction, they thought that the whole world is going to be destroyed, so they meant well. They meant well. And what is that? That they thought to themselves, look, there's no man around, that's it. So we have to regenerate, we have to repopulate the world. So let us make our father drunk, and let us lay with him, and he will impregnate us, and then the world will continue to exist. They meant well. But the mere fact that God orchestrated things in such a manner by which they would commit incense shows that he was lacking in this very act. He himself was deprived in this very act, and he himself was responsible for the fact that he was willing to forego the honor of his own daughters. Otherwise, God would not have orchestrated in such a way. There were other human beings in the world. They just didn't see, they just didn't understand. God would have made people pass by their cave where they were hiding, or whatever the case may be, as a punishment. To punish him. To punish him that he will forever be shamed. Forever be shamed because his morals and his laws and his concept of what's right and what's wrong was based upon his own mind rather than the fear of God. I want to draw your attention to an interesting thing, which I'm going to elaborate a little bit more. In 2 weeks, I'm going to give a shiur on the historical backdrop of Hanukkah How is it that almost 30 to 40% of Jews prior to the miracle of Hanukkah assimilated? What was the attraction to the Greek philosophy? So I'm going to speak about that in 2 weeks as a preparation for Hanukkah, and then I'll give a lecture on Hanukkah. So very interesting lessons that we can draw from the historical backdrop of what happened then. That'll be in 2 weeks' time. But just very briefly, the Sefer Ikarim, a philosophical work, writes a very interesting thing. He writes that the religion of ethics, which means to say the belief in morals or those who are humanists, what do they call them? They have a name. Yeah, humanitarians. Those who don't believe in God, just believe in the in the emotions and the humanity. He says that is a false religion. Because they proclaim that which is ugly to be beautiful and that which is beautiful to be ugly. And he brings a proof from Plato. Plato was one of the famed philosophers. There was Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Teacher, student, student. Plato was a famed philosopher. In those days, philosophy, if you were a philosopher, you were you were a hero. Today, nobody cares about philosophy. If you know how to work the mobile phone, if you know the computers, if you know to give me data, if you know to this, to that, you can tell me about the stock market. Yeah, today you're a hero. That's today's hero. But the hero of those days are philosophers. People who delved into philosophy. And in fact, they were the most feared because they could topple a government. The rulers feared the philosophy because if they had a following, they could topple a government. So he writes that Plato himself proposed that the elite share wives. Share wives. That was his philosophy. No boundaries. The Greeks were those who broke down total barriers of sexual license. Sports were done without clothing. But as I said, in 2 weeks I'm going to speak about that more at length. And they taught, their sexual behavior was, what do you call it when they both homosexual and heterosexual, what do they call it? Bisexual. They had relationship both with men and women, and they taught something that's bizarre. And that is that even if they had relations with a woman, in other words, even if they weren't homosexual per se, but they openly taught that the greatest love that could ever be experienced is only from a man to a man. Now, okay, if you have homosexual tendencies like today, then you say, well, he loves this one, you love that one, and that's it. But in those days, no, it wasn't that you said that if you're a homosexual. No, even if you were a heterosexual, you should become bisexual, because there's an advantage of both, and the concept of love can greater be experienced only through a homosexual relation. Maimonides in Moreh Nevuchim writes, the Guide to the Perplexed writes, and he wrote this book as a book of philosophy. There he lays the ground rules, and he says that to preserve human morals cannot be without the fear of heaven. Cannot be without the fear of heaven. If there is no fear of heaven, if there's no acceptance of a higher entity that governs us, that gives us laws and morals, of which they are truth, and the Gemara says, En emet ela Torah. The only truth, because what did we say before the definition of truth is? Something that endures. Nothing endures. There is no philosophy that endures. If you have a look today, the philosophy of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, totally rejected. Totally unacceptable. It's unacceptable philosophy. In those days, it was unbelievable philosophy. So respected that even Maimonides himself included some of his philosophies as a guide to the perplexed, to try and to bring Judaism to the masses who believed in philosophy and so respected philosophy, even the philosophy of Aristotle. Today it's totally rejected. It's worthless. The philosophy of the Greeks, worthless. The big philosophers, the Greeks were from the greatest philosophers of history. Aside from the Jewish people, but the Jewish people focused their attention to Torah, not so philosophy. Philosophy came from Shlomo HaMelech, and then the Jewish people slowly weaned themselves from philosophy because they had the Torah. Torah is everything. It resurfaced later on in the Middle Ages, the times of Spain and other, where again the greatest philosophers were from the Jews, and they brought, a lot of art in that period because there was a big resurgence of philosophy amongst the people of the world and also amongst the Jewish people. So again, the philosophy was resurrected somewhat amongst the Jewish people, but predominantly the Jewish people did not so much play with philosophy because Torah. Because Torah is the greatest philosophy, because Torah is truth. Philosophy is not truth. But Torah is truth because it comes from God. And therefore it's absolute, and therefore it's eternal, and therefore it's the greatest protection to the moral compass of humanity. Without it, it's impossible to be able to have a proper moral compass. Now let's give some examples. Could there be any greater, I'll take questions in a minute. Could there be any greater example of a nation that were from the most cultured nation in the world at the time? The most cultured nation in the world at the time were the Germans. Many of the Jews who lived there, 40-50% of Jews who lived in Germany were assimilated Jews. They were so proud of Germany that they called Germany their home. Over and superseded Jerusalem. The Reform movement started in Germany because it was such a cultured nation, and they were attracted to the culture of the Germans. Yet this very nation that was so cultured turned around a nature of culture, a nature of morals, of science, of arts, of music, of rules, of laws. The Germans are known for laws. For laws. They keep laws. We are commemorating this week Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht was when they passed the laws against the Jews, and they burnt synagogues, they burnt Jewish homes, they burnt Jewish businesses, they shattered the glasses, the shop front windows, and they shattered them all. Someone informed a rabbi was giving a lecture to the kids that his house is burning. He picks up the phone and he calls the fire department. And he says, "My home is burning, I live in such and such, quick go. What's your name?" Finkelstein, some Jewish name, I can't remember the name of the rabbi. Goldberg, Goldstein, Goldfarb. "I'm sorry, sir, it's against the law. It's against the law to go and put out a fire in your house now." You understand? Yesterday that was the law. Today they changed the law. This is exactly what Avraham Avinu told Avimelech. Yes, yesterday that's the law. Tomorrow the law can change. So I can live amongst you and tell you that Sarah is my wife, but you will then justify or pass a new law because your law is based upon your own feelings and your own intellect, not upon something that is enduring. Yesterday the Germans would abide by this law. "Oh, I'm sorry, but we have a law. We must keep to the law." What's the law? That we burn Jewish homes. Now that's the new law. Yesterday it wasn't. 10 years ago, you were a moral nation. The same nation that was so moral did the greatest atrocities that were in fact so absurd that destroyed their very nation. We know Hitler and Machshimo spent a lot of energy and focus upon destroying the Jews, even at the expense of losing the war. Especially towards the end when he needed men at the front. He used them. No, he did not divert them from killing the Jews and send them to where he needs to protect his nation or win the war. No, what's life to him? Nothing. Meaningless. As long as he gets what the passions of his heart, the desires of his heart, as the Malbim writes, everything is justified. Everything is justified. Hitler justified the wars, going against so many nations and killing so many people. How many people died in the Second World War? 50 million people? 50 million, over 50 million people died. Somewhere in that vicinity died. Why? Because of the laws that were passed by Hitler and his nation that accepted it so lovingly. 10 years ago, you were a moral nation. 20 years ago, you're the most cultured nation in the world. And they did the most unfathomable things, unfathomable crimes, because there was no fear of God. No fear of God. And it's known that Hitler wanted to remove the concept of conscience, of guilt. And the Jewish people are a reminder of that. I'm going to speak about that in 2 weeks' time. What about communism? Think about what communism means. A lot of Jews were swept by communism. Who made up communism? A Jew. Karl Marx. The greatest communists were Jews. Why? Because it's a very attractive thing for a Jew, because the Jews believe in sharing, in caring, in equality, social equality. People are equal. Everyone's deserving of a chance. We should all share. Sounds ideal. Sounds like a utopia. Sounds great. It didn't work. To make it work, they killed. How many people were killed in the name of communism? You know how many people? Over 50 million people, I believe, were killed. Do you understand what that means? Here you're instituting something, instituting laws that are to protect people. To protect their interests. No longer the rich will take advantage of the poor, correct? Yet you're taking away their lives. The biggest robbers, the biggest thieves were the communists. It didn't work. And they took care of the elite and they took care of themselves. They got rid of one elite, but they created another elite. Rak ki en yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. Yes, you have everything. You've got a good system. It makes sense. I've read Karl Marx's book. It's good. Everything makes sense. But there's no fear of God. If there's no fear of God, it's empty, it's vain, it's worthless. It cannot endure, it cannot be sustainable, because men will corrupt it. People will corrupt it. I remember many years ago reading an article. There's big debate. There was big debate years ago. There's still big debate. When is a person considered dead? Today we have much more machines that can monitor the brain and this and that, and when a brain is the stem is totally dead. But many years ago they didn't have the machines to be able to ascertain that, and we know many people were in a vegetative state, came back to life and continued to live, etc., etc., etc. Always in halakha, death means when the heart stops and the person stops breathing. That's when death is. All of a sudden came a moral dilemma. There were many doctors who were saying, no, if a person has particular brain damage and parts of the brains are dead, and that was in a time that they couldn't assess as much as what we can assess today. So maybe in theory they were right, but very hard to be able to actually monitor it and prove it in those days. No, you're dead, you should be proclaimed dead when you're brain dead. Why? Because they had an interest. And the interest was that they just found a way to transplant a heart. Now, I'm not getting into the debate whether a person is halachically or medically dead, with brain dead or not, whatever. And that's a big discussion amongst halachic authorities. But most certainly years ago, when we didn't have the ways to examine like we have today, it was tainted. It was flawed. Why? Because it was for an ulterior purpose, and it was pushed by people who had an agenda. And the agenda is, we know how to transplant a heart, but we can only transplant a heart while the person is breathing. So therefore, what do? We change the law. And we then proclaim that a person is dead, not when his heart is dead, not when he stops breathing, because then the heart is useless. When you're brain dead, then we can take out the heart. That's humanity. Emet me'eretz titzmah. Emet is on the ground. Why is it on the ground? Because it doesn't suit us. We do away with it. We push it aside when it doesn't suit us. And that's why Abraham Avinu said, if there's no fear of God, then your morals are meaningless, are valueless. Let's take this another step further. What about the Aussie nation, the stolen generation? You know about the stolen generation? They meant well. Children, Aboriginal children, they meant well. They wanted to bring them up cultured. They saw these people, how they were growing, they're totally foreign to the way that they lived. But they were happy. They were living, they were happy. Leave them alone. No, we're going to take them, the stolen generation. The amount of damage that stolen generation caused is immense. Take China. China, communist nation. Not enough water to go around. Well, we're going to pass a rule. What's the rule? Against what God says. Multiply and populate the world. One-child policy. One-child policy. You know how the law that Lot passed in his own mind about his daughters? Because he passed a law. He passed a judgment. Better I forego the honor of my daughters than my own honor and the honor of my guests. Right? He passed a law. Came back to bite him, didn't it? So in China, the same thing. They passed a law, and that is one-child policy. You can only have a child. What did they do with that? What did they do with that? They created a situation by which there are more aged people than young people. Massive burden on the country. Massive burden on the country. Massive burden on the individual. Because the policy in China is there's no pension like we have in these countries. Massive burden. You have one child taking care of two elderly parents. That's the culture. Very difficult. The pressure on these children are immense. They cannot afford to get married. Because you have to work so hard. There's no time for them to meet people because they're so busy, because they have to sustain their parents and save to sustain their parents. Came down to bite them. Now they have elderly. And more people are older, less people are working, less people paying taxes. What else did they do? With silence. For people, it was more worth their while to have a boy than a girl. Because you have much more chances for work, much more chances to get a good job, much more chances then to support us when we get old, right? So what did they cause? Massive amounts of abortions. Massive amounts of abortion. Now to a Noahide, to the nations of the world who abide by the Noahide laws, the 7 Noahide laws, abortions is absolutely forbidden. Absolutely forbidden. There's no justification for abortion. It's not just for the Jews. The 7 Noahide laws, it's for all humanity. All of the children of Noah accepted the 7 Noahide laws. If you want to change them, if you want to do what you want, it's up to you. But it was laws that was accepted by Noah and passed down to his children and was accepted universally. They caused massive amounts of abortion, killing children. This is what they cause. When you pass laws, and these laws are not based upon the fear of God, so they turned a blind eye to the abortions. Millions and millions of unborn children were killed. Millions! Because of these laws that weren't ethical, because they weren't based upon the laws of God. Let me give you another example. You know the story of the Yemenite Jews in Israel? Unfortunately, a lot of the Jews who were the secular Zionists were themselves very secular and were very socialistic, like communists. A lot of Jews from Russia, from Poland, were swept away with communism. They brought this secularism and philosophy of a godless state to the state of Israel. Go have a look in the constitution of the state of Israel. Is God mentioned there at all? Is God mentioned in the national anthem of the Jewish people? Not the Jewish people, of the state of Israel? There's no mention of God there. No mention in the constitution, no mention of God in the anthem. Predicated upon socialism. No God. No God. Where did that lead them? Where did that lead them? It led them to not accept to not enact the bribes that the Germans were willing to accept unless the Jews will come to Israel, not to Germany, not to America, not to UK, only to Israel. Thousands of Jews were murdered in the Holocaust because of that. Thousands of Hungarian Jews were not saved from the Holocaust simply because of that. You remember the Yemenite Jews? What happened? Big scandal in Israel. Many Jews from the elite, so to speak, of the society, of the Israeli, of the secular left, socialist people who came from Europe, perhaps survived the Holocaust. A lot of them couldn't have children. Now, where are you going to get children from? Here you have Yemenite Jews who were very simple, who were very tmimim. How do you say tmimim? Or very, sorry? Very believing, very sincere, very believing people. Naive. Sorry? Naive. They're very naive. They're very naive people. They figured a plan. And the plan is that you take a child, they've got plenty of kids. Said, what do you need? 7 kids, 5 kids. They've got plenty of kids. Take one away from here, take one away from here, take one away from here. Give it to the adoption. Give it to adoption. Scandal. This is a fact. This is not a story. So this is not one of those, this is a fact. And they took him for adoption. And people believed that they were the child of Mr. Fisher and Mr. this and Mr. this and Mr. that. Later on they found out that no, they were adopted or whatever the case may be. They were kidnapped from their parents and they were told, the mothers were told, that your child died. It's a fact. Where there is no God, you do atrocities. You do atrocities. Why? Because you think that it's better for the child anyway. But it's not. It's proven that it's not. It's better for the child to be in a poor home with both father and both mother, even if he's poor. He gets love and he gets attention and he feels a part of the family. And that was proven. Disaster they brought upon these families. How can you do such a thing? How can you justify such a thing? Now I read, but I don't know whether this is true, but there were some kids that were taken who were sent to America for experiments. And in exchange, America will give Israel billions or millions, in those days, millions of dollars of aid for what's his name, for weapons. I don't know. The Yemenite story is proven. It's known. This story, I haven't had the time to research more, but I read it, and there's a possibility. There's a possibility for where there is no fear of God, then unfortunately, this can take place. I want to end off with two stories that can even find themselves even within the realm of people who do believe in God, people who are religious, but yet sometimes we sort of throw away truth when it doesn't suit us. In a bet din, when you do a divorce, no alenu v'lo alechem, you need 2 kosher witnesses, and witnesses that are not related to any parties. Not to the rabbis, not to the husband, not to the wife, not to each other. And they have to be kosher witnesses. In a particular bet din, comes a guy who says, I want to be a witness. the rabbi delays the get, and he says, no, I can't do it now, we have to do it later, and he's keeping on delaying the get. Suddenly there's an announcement that there's mincha. Let's pray mincha. The rabbi says, okay, let's pray mincha in the meantime, and then we'll do the get. Everybody goes to mincha. The rabbi quickly goes, tells the scribe to write the get, the divorce, gets two witnesses, signs the get, bang, 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 bang. When they come back, the get is done. So the other rabbis ask the head rabbi, says, what happened over here? First you say you delay it, and then all of a sudden you're in a big rush to write the get. What happened here? He said, I'll explain to you. It says, when everything was finished and everybody went away, the rabbi says, let me tell you a story. You know that guy who came in who was willing to be a witness to the get? Because sometimes you need manpower, you need people, And he called me 2 days ago. And he told me the following story. That is that his boss works them overtime without pay. And what he did was that he found a mechanism, and they produced paper. What they found a mechanism to filter away some of the paper, and they take it and then they sell it as a compensation. Guy's got no right to go and work us and extra hours. And so I told him that according to halakha, this is no good, it's not acceptable. And he was justifying it. No, I get paid. I made a calculation, this would be the amount, and that was the end of that. When I saw him coming to the Beit Din to be a witness, I didn't want to embarrass him, but I didn't know how to get rid of him, because I'm not going to use him as a witness. So as soon as they called for mincha and he went to pray mincha, that's why I quickly rushed to do the get. But as long as he was here, I was delaying, I was finding a way. Maybe he'll go, maybe he'll get sick and say it's taking too long, maybe he'll go away. But he came to offer his services. I couldn't just send him off away. As soon as he went to mincha, chick-chack, we finished the get, we did the get. Another story. A guy tells another person, both are religious Jews. And we also have a mind that unfortunately likes to justify our actions. But we have to learn from Abraham Avinu that first and foremost must always come the fear of God and the pursuit of absolute truth in accordance with the Torah. If we place our mind before that, we will fail. So the guy says a story. He says, I'm a supplier of goods. I get a phone call from a guy who owns a wedding hall in Israel. And the wedding halls go to, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, wakes me up. Hey, Pinchas, I need this and I need this. And he starts giving me a whole list. He says, well, are you crazy? It's 1 o'clock at night. What do you wake me up? No, I need it. Now, he was up because he's in the middle of the wedding and the wedding's finishing off. He's making an inventory. He wants to get a good night's sleep. And he already wants to put in the order so tomorrow it'll be delivered without any care and concern for this guy that he woke him up in the middle of the night. So what does he do? He says, okay, no problem. 4 o'clock in the morning when he wakes up, dials the number to Yossi. Hey, Yossi, okay, I can take your order now. What? 4 o'clock in the morning, what are you, crazy? Sidarti oto. I fixed him up. I paid him back. No. Good or not good? Very good. I fixed him up, taught him a lesson. Asiti bet sefer, like we say in Hebrew. I put him in school. Sometimes that's the only way to teach people. What about Nikama? What about you're not allowed to take revenge? You did it to me, I'll do it to you. What justification do you have? The Torah says you're not allowed to do that. The Torah says that's called taking revenge. You're not allowed to take revenge. You're not allowed to hold a grudge. You're not allowed to hold a grudge. The Torah says, do not hold a grudge in your heart. Got to let it go. Not allowed to. It's one of the 365 prohibitions. To take revenge, even as innocent as you think that was, or a nice practical joke that was, you're transgressing. You're eating pig. No difference. No difference from eating pig. Holding a grudge against someone, eating pig. Same thing. This is a prohibition. This is a prohibition. We would never eat pig. Like the guy one time, the guy says, my whole life I eat kosher. One time, I want to taste what it's like. So he goes to a restaurant and he orders pig. And the rabbi walks by and he looks in and he says, Shimon, what are you doing here? He sees a big Shimon sitting there with a thing, the what do you call it? The napkin tucked here, and he's got the fork and the knife. And he sees a nice big pig over there with a nice apple over there. And the little hats on the legs, the chef hats on the legs. And he says, what are you doing, Shimon? He says, Rabbi, I don't know. I ordered an apple and this is what they brought. They brought all of this. I don't know what type of restaurant this is. Unfortunately, we human beings have a tendency to justify things. Nobody would dream of, if you keep kasher, nobody would dream of eating pig. It would be furthest from your mind. But to cheat a little bit here, to take a little bit of revenge there, to teach this one a lesson, to have a little bit of this, to speak Lashon Hara about that one. What do you mean? I'm saying the truth. How many times we say people Lashon Hara? What do you mean? I'm telling the truth. Lashon Hara is truth. If you're lying, that's a separate sin. Lying. Motzi Shem Ra, you're putting a bad name against another person. These are other prohibitions. When you say the truth, and you're telling her, what so-and-so did, that's Lashon Hara. But it's the truth. Exactly, Lashon Hara is the truth. You're not allowed to go and spread evil gossip, even if it is the truth, amongst other people. Even if he stepped on your toe in the supermarket one time. Not allowed to do it. But unfortunately, we human beings have a tendency to justify, to explain things away. That's what Abraham Avinu tells us. You want to be honest, you want to be truthful, you have to be able to have the fear of God. We'll stop here and we'll take the questions that we have.